Hello there. Today's video will be somewhat different. We'll be doing a game review, but it's a game review of one of my games. And it was a game against the current world champion, Gukesh, over the board at the 2021 Riga Technical University Open, which is a very big open tournament that is held almost every year. And this seems like a lot of years back. And at this point, I was rated about 2255, and Gukesh was rated a mere 2580, which is of course a lot. But at that point, no one really expected him to become as strong as he currently was, and as he currently is, I mean. And even in this tournament, he was only the 13th seed, below players like Nihal, Prague, and also Arjun Ergaisi. So there were a lot of Indian super talents at this point, and there was no guarantee that specifically Gukesh would become the world champion. So when I was facing him, you don't really know what's going to happen in the future. I was just thinking, oh well, he was a very strong Grandmaster, so it's just a normal game. I have beaten Grandmasters in the past, so it shouldn't be too scary. But I was a little bit wrong. So at the moment, I was doing quite well in the tournament. Gukesh was also doing quite well, and we were paired on the 7th board. I was playing white, and I opted for d4. This is what I was usually playing, though I was at the same time playing other openings like e4 and c4, and I was hoping to catch him by surprise by playing d4 because I hadn't played it in this tournament yet. So he played d5, which I was happy about because I was expecting knight f6 and after c4 e6, and I believe I was planning to allow the Nimzo Indian, and I had something prepared. What I had prepared, I do not remember. But he played d5, I played c4. This was also, of course, something that he would play. I knew this might happen. But at this point he played, instead of the typical knight f6, he played bishop b4. And already I was kind of out of book. I was expecting him to play knight f6. If he had played d5, I thought he would play the queen's gambit declined. I would have probably taken on d5, played bishop g5 the standard way, and we would have a Carlsbad structure. We would hopefully have an interesting game, and hopefully something good would come of it. But he played this bishop b4 move, which is a bit more rare, and I don't remember seeing him play this, but it makes sense, especially against a lower rated player, to play something a bit offbeat. This move is completely fine, and it avoids the typical Carlsbad. Now if I take bishop g5 is not a move, because the knight is not on f6. So I fought for a bit and I played knight f3, which allows a transposition to the Rogozin defense, which he takes with knight f6. Black could also take this pawn, and these lines are also quite interesting, for example e4, b5, and a4, but he just played the Rogozin, so this became a transposition to the Rogozin defense, which I wasn't really prepared for, so I was a little bit caught off guard myself quite early on. But of course, the Rogozin is quite a standard opening, so I had some ideas here. I decided for queen a4, knight c6 is forced. The idea of queen a4 is to force the knight to c6, where the knight will hopefully stand badly, blocking the c-pawn, which will now not be able to play c5 or c6. Usually black's idea in these positions will be to at some point take, and then play e5, after bringing the bishop back to d6. So my idea here was to play a lot of waiting moves and wait for black to take here so that I could take on c4 in one go. So firstly e3, he castles, and I played bishop d2, which is actually the main move here. He plays a6, which is a bit offbeat. Probably he thought I was still prepared because I was playing the main line here, and the main way to play here is to take, go bishop d6, prepare an e5, and for example after queen c2 and e5, these type of positions are quite good for black. After f4, white can still try to gain some kind of advantage, but the position is quite theoretical. Most of the games end in draws, so probably this is why he opted for this not very good move, a6. But the idea is always there. Sometimes he wants to play b5 whenever it's possible. At this point I played rook d1, which is also an idea I knew. This is one of the kind of useful moves white can make. Keep in mind I don't want to develop my bishop, because then he will take. I will take back, and then he will go bishop d6, and my bishop will have lost a tempo. And for example, now after queen c2 or something, he can play e5, and we get some kind of normal position, but my bishop has moved twice. So I want to get this with some kind of useful move involved, right? Like rook d1. In hindsight, a3 was a better move, and if black takes the knight, now playing e5 will be quite difficult for black. He has to play knight e4, for example, but after queen c2, black will have a hard time getting e5 or c5, and if he doesn't play either of these moves, the bishop on c8 will be quite problematic. I would assume he would play bishop e7 here to keep some tension, and after, for example, queen c2, he might play something like rook e8, and the game goes on. But white is a little bit better because black is having a hard time playing e5 or c5. But I played rook d1, which is also fine. He plays rook e8, also a useful waiting move. Keep in mind he doesn't want to also take here, though it is objectively possible. He wants to get this position with some kind of waiting move. So this is kind of a waiting game. I'm trying to not use my bishop. He is also waiting for me to move my bishop. So rook e8, h3, also somewhat of a waiting move. This one is kind of useless, but also in line with my idea. a3 was probably better. At this point, the bishop would probably go to f8. But again, after queen c2, black is fine if he finds e5, and if he doesn't, then white can hope for some kind of small pressure. With h3, now Gukesh thinks for a while and plays h6, so I guess he wasn't satisfied with things in the center, and again he gives the ball to white and asks, what's your waiting move? What are you going to do if you're not going to develop your f1 bishop? The answer should have been either queen c2, which is a useful waiting move. The queen has done its job, making the knight develop to c6. Now it can go back to c2, not becoming a target. And after, for example, bishop f8, something like b3, white is doing okay, but of course black can equalize after something like e5. So at this point I thought I had run out of useful waiting moves. So I played this move, bishop e2. He of course now takes. I take and bishop d6. So this was all expected. But at this point black has equalized because white didn't use all of the waiting moves that he could have used. So now black is preparing e5 to open up his light squared bishop and attack white's center. And there's not much white can do about this. So castles. And at this point black played rook b8. Now black is threatening b5. Keep in mind b5 was never a real threat because of the pin, so white could just take and take the rook on a8 as it's not defended. So after rook b8 this is a threat, white has to react, the queen goes back to c2. And now again black could try e5, but this wouldn't be such a good idea because, for example, when white takes and it takes back, now white has time to push his pawn majority with f4, for example bishop d6, e4, and e5 next. White is safely pushing his pawn majority, and he will be quite a bit better here, because black does not have enough counterplay in the center, and he is not well enough developed. So Gukesh understands this, so he develops the bishop first, b5. I move the bishop to e2, bishop b7. And now probably the first kind of mistake, which is e4. The move is natural enough, but again white should have waited a little bit. At this point white can't really hope for an advantage. Black's e5 is coming next. White's d2 bishop is not very good, and the black's pieces are basically pretty well placed, all of them. At this point a3 would have been a better move, with the idea to not allow b4. Now if b4 white could take, and the knight on c3 will remain stable. and this will make the center stable for white. Instead e4, but now black answers of course e5. There was a fork threatened, and now I took. So pushing this wouldn't be a good idea. After knight d4, white is basically lost. If he takes, he will lose the pawn on e4. So white takes, black takes back, takes, and black takes with the rook. So at this point I understood that I'm in a little bit of trouble, though of course I did see it beforehand a little bit. So at this point my pawn on e4 is attacked, and it is somewhat in trouble. The obvious answer is to play f3 to defend the pawn forever, but after b4 my knight will have a hard time finding a good square. For example, after knight e4 and for example queen e8, the knight is running out of squares, the threat is bishop c6, and there might be some problems. Also, there are some ideas using this pin, for example knight d5, maybe to go somewhere further, and the position is quite unpleasant. So at this point I played bishop f3, and this basically gives up a pawn, but I was hoping to get enough counterplay. The other way to play was bishop f4, but this also gives up a pawn with bishop takes e4, and I believe this was the move I had missed from afar, and this is why my position is not great, because if black had to move the rook, he would be in quite a bit of trouble. But after bishop e4, and white can take, taking here, we get something similar to the game, but white's bishop is still on the board against this knight, and even though black is a pawn ahead, he has this passed pawn on the d-file, his pieces are not that well placed, and white can hope to get some kind of counterplay, and he has some compensation for the pawn. It's not enough, but it is something. So instead bishop f3 was played, black plays b4 to win the pawn on e4. I played bishop f4, this was kind of the point, and queen e7, a very important move. At this point, of course, black can't take here because he will not recapture on e5. So the point was queen e7, and whenever white takes, which I did, there is mate threatened on h2, and the knight is also attacked, which means I have to give up the rook on d6, giving back the exchange. And at the end of this line, still my knight on c3 is attacked. If it moves randomly, he will just take the pawn on e4. So I decided the best course of action here would be to trade some pieces and go into a major piece endgame and try my luck there. So knight e5, he picks up the pawn, everything gets exchanged, and rook d1 was played. In hindsight, maybe I shouldn't have given him a passed pawn on the queen side. Maybe a bit better was to play b3 or maybe even a3. And then rook d1 will come with tempo, and black does have a pawn up. Black is definitely better, but white does have some kind of chances. Of course, a very difficult defense lies ahead, but it is possible to defend probably. Rook d1 is also fine. At this point we exchange pawns, he takes on a2, I take on d6, and here black is a pawn ahead, and the best course of action for black would have been to bring back the queen, specifically first give a check and then bring back the queen. This threatens queen e5, so this is coming with tempo, and black will move away the queen and start pushing his a pawn. White is not without counterplay, but this is probably the most efficient way to play for black. Instead, Gukesh plays a5, which is a natural move, but this allows some counterplay for white because now this queen is a little bit stuck. As we can see, it currently does not have any squares, well, apart from a1, but all of these squares are covered, a4 is also covered, so this queen cannot go back. So here, even though the position is still in the drawing range, I made a mistake with h4, and the idea is correct. The idea is to play h5 at some point to not allow g6, and try to play against this king while this queen is far away, and try to get some kind of perpetual check. Unfortunately, this was the wrong way to do it. The most accurate way to play here was king h2, and the idea here is to not allow queen b1 or queen a1 check at any point, and now black does not really have a very useful move. For example, if he plays a4, this pawn might get picked up. After rook a6, the pawn is attacked, and after a3, importantly, the queen moves away from this pin with tempo, and after the rook moves away, now we can take, and for example here, we simply pick up the pawn on a3. There were other variations as well, but they all illustrate the same point. The king is better placed on h2, because for example, if we look at this position again, black would be able to give a check here and then push his pawn to a2 if it weren't for the move king h2. So I did not think of this way to play. This would have given white a drawn position. Of course, this doesn't mean I would have drawn here, but it would have given me quite a lot more chances. Instead h4, black pushes a4, and now the losing blunder h5, continuing the wrong idea. And the reason this is lost will be apparent in a few moves. I missed a very important move by black, a very important idea. Instead here, if white had played king h2, again this idea kind of works, the point being after a3, we move the queen with tempo, queen c7, after rook f8, white can play rook d8, now checkmate is threatened, rook f8 and queen d8, so black basically has to take. We will take back. This is almost a perpetual, but black has g6. Now we take on a3. Black can take back with the queen or with the pawn, but if he takes back with the pawn, we can play h5, and this illustrates the point of playing h4 earlier. And now when white takes here, white will have a lot of counterplay against this king. It will be very difficult to avoid some kind of perpetual check while trying to promote this pawn. So at this point the position is drawn. Otherwise, if the queen takes here, the queen should move to d5, attacking this one. For example, after king g7, well, king g8 probably is better. We can play h5, and again white has a lot of counterplay against this king. Some kind of perpetuals are always in the air, and it's very dangerous for black. Instead, I played this move h5, but unfortunately this loses right away due to a very simple concept. He plays a3, now I play queen c7, similar to the ideas mentioned before, rook f8, rook d8, and now the only move for black to win the game, which I had completely overlooked, which is queen b1 check. And the point this is so strong is that this queen now guards the whole diagonal, and after black takes and goes king h7, it doesn't matter that I have brought this pawn to h5 because I will never be able to check on this diagonal, and this pawn is simply promoting, and I am about to be a queen down, so I took, he took back, and here I resigned against Gukesh because the next move is a2 and the next move after that is a1, and I have absolutely no counterplay here because his queen and king are on the same diagonal, and it is impossible to give a single check, so there is no perpetual. So this is why I should have moved the king away to h2 at some point, so that this move queen b1 does not come with tempo. So quite a tough game. After this I suffered a few more losses, but I ended up winning a few, and the tournament turned out quite fine. The tournament also turned around for Gukesh, and his performance got a bit better. He finished fine, and we were probably both somewhat happy with the outcome of the tournament. But in this game, probably it was important to understand that the checks always matter, especially in these major piece endgames. And white had quite a realistic chance to draw against Gukesh, which would have been something to really talk about with your friends a few years later in 2025.